Hello, everyone. Uh, this is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topic for tonight is Claudia Sheinbaum and MORENA's Landslide, in Mexico. And co-hosting with me tonight will be Dee Piers, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see April here.
Actually, she's not. She just made the comment. Hi, Joepedia. I'm going out with Wealthy tonight.
Oh, okay.
Family tonight, I should say. But I shared and liked, and we'll watch later.
Oh, thank you.
So she's not quite here yet, but we have at least a couple of people here, certainly enough to get going. So, why do we have this special show in the first place? Well, there was so much news this week that, uh, it was just too much, at least for me, and I wasn't able to fit anything I wanted to talk about in my regular schedule from Tuesday through Friday. So that's why I'm having this special show Saturday, and why you're seeing me now. At least I hope you're seeing me now. And Dee says hello, everyone. And I say hello, everyone, too. So I'm going to get started with some facts on the election in Mexico, and with okay, Dee, would you like to take the first piece from Jacobin, or the second piece from Common Dreams? OD is muted, unfortunately. So things may be too noisy where she is at this point. She's been having some excitement with her dogs lately. So I'm going to start off with Claudia Scheinbaum's victory as a triumph. Uh, the Jacobin article is a triumph for Mexico. This is pieces by Kurt Hackbarth, uh, who says Claudia Sheinbaum has won Mexico's presidential election in a landslide. In her victory speech, she paid homage to the social movements of the past and promised to continue Morena's impressive record of social progress. And there's a picture of Claudia, very happy, of course,
Mm-hmm.
waving to the crowd after her victory. Yes, Dee?
I was going to say, yeah, she looks beautiful there, doesn't she? It's the happiness, and she looks great.
Yeah, she looks like she's just all sunshine.
Yes.
All sunshine, and no rain. Uh, Probably her husband is there close by, but I'm not entirely sure what he looks like. I think he's this guy over there where my cursor is,
Okay.
the good looking guy. Claudia Sheinbaum, winner for the presidency of Mexico for the Morena Party on June 3rd, 2024. So that was 5 days ago. The Morena leadership holed up in the Hilton Hotel in Mexico City was in a state of quiet shock. They knew they were going to win Mexico's presidential election, but not by that much.
Okay.
As results trickled in yesterday evening, it became clear that the long-expected victory was a drubbing. So far, Claudia Sheinbaum, at the time of writing this article, holds a 30-point lead over her conservative rival, which she did. Her conservative rival's name was Xochitl Galvez. That's the way you pronounce that. Xochitl Galvez. 58.3% to 28.7%. It wasn't only just a 30-point lead. I mean, the coalition of the other major parties only got 28.7% of the vote. I mean, that's awful, awful. With third party candidate Jorge Alvarez Maynez coming in at 10.5%. According to projections made by the National Electoral Institute, Sheinbaum's final total was expected to fall within a range of 58.3 to 60.7%, outperforming all but a pair of final pre-election polls. According to the Institute's Conteo Rapido, or fast account, the landslide was expected to carry over into Congress as well, with Morena and its allies winning up to 380 of 500 seats in the lower house, the chamber, of deputies. And for perspective, you compare that to the Republican victory this time in 2022. What did they win? 222 out of 435 seats.
Hmm.
That's all they won. This is 380 out of 500 seats. It's, just incredible. In the lower house, the Chamber of Deputies, and up to 88 of 128 seats came in the Senate. And of course, this compares to the Democratic majority of 51 to 49 in our Senate. This would put the center-left coalition within range of its ambitious goal of achieving a qualified majority of two-thirds, which would allow it to pass constitutional reforms on its own, together with the legislatures, the state legislatures it controls. Not only did Morena win the all-important mayorship of Mexico City with candidate Clara Brugada, the Morena coalition is also set to pick up at least 6 of the 8 governor's races that were up for grabs. To put Morena's victory in perspective, Sheinbaum is on course to best Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, AMLO's 2018 landslide victory of 53% by some 5 to 7 points, where AMLO received a historic total of 30 million votes. Sheinbaum will have received some 35 million votes. That also puts that into perspective. That's fantastic. Similarly, Galvez was running about 10 to 12 points behind the Conservative Party's total in that election. 2018, the Conservative Party's Institucional Revolutionary Party, the PRA, and the National Action Party, PAN, ran separately, but this year they ran in coalition. But instead of adding in numbers, the coalition wound up subtracting. A refusal to be goaded. True to her scientific background, Sheinbaum, who's an engineer, I believe she's an environmental engineer, if I recall correctly, ran a disciplined, methodical campaign, taking nothing for granted, despite holding a virtually unchanged lead since announcing her candidacy. Oh, by the way, she was formerly the mayor of Mexico City, which is a traditional route, to the presidency. That was true for AMLO also. He was the mayor of Mexico City before, and then he became the president of Mexico. Since announcing her candidacy, Sheinbaum racked up the miles, holding 3 times as many rallies as Galvez, where Galvez veered from one uncosted policy proposal to another. Sheinbaum rolled out a 100-point program that includes extending social programs and scholarships, continuing annual minimum wage increases, consolidating Mexico's push toward national health care, building 1 million affordable homes on a rent-to-buy plan, constructing 7 long-distance train lines, also avoiding the maquiladora experience of the 1990s by mandating that companies investing in the, quote, nearshoring, unquote, phenomenon provide higher wages and benefits, and in what is certain to continue raising the shackles of multinational energy interests, a public sector led energy transition building on Mexico's state owned oil, electricity, and lithium companies. Boy, doesn't that compare well to the United States?
Mhm.
I was watching uh, I guess it was on Judge Napolitano's show. It, uh, it might have been on Nima Alkachic's show as well, but I think it was on the judge's show. Uh, they were talking about what's happening to the United States and the problems of leadership here and all the problems, that we're having, and where people can go. And so Larry was saying, well, maybe people should be going south of the border now because things are getting a lot better there. So anyway, Sheinbaum refused to be goaded by opposition candidate Galvez. Scattershot series of attacks that got nastier over time. Galvez, playing to the hilt a go negative campaign strategy, attacked everything from her character to her family to her record as Mexico City mayor, winding up with a series of dog whistle insinuations about Scheinbaum's Jewish heritage. And here comes another joke from Larry Wilkerson. He was asked whether he thought that Scheinbaum was a CIA asset in
Mhm.
Mexico, and he replied, no, he thought that she was more likely a Mossad asset in
Mhm.
Mexico. Larry Wilkerson has a very wry sense of humor.
Mhm.
Scheinbaum also refused to be goaded by those who repeated that she is going to be a puppet of outgoing President AMLO. Every time someone would try to insist on the need to create a more individualistic image, as if she were marketing a new brand of cereal or detergent,
Mhm.
Scheinbaum would calmly explain that she represents a social movement
Mhm.
and that her administration will proudly be the segundo piso, or second floor, of Mexico's fourth transformation. That is the fourth transformation since the Mexican Revolution of 1910. They've been going through transformations now for more than 100 years. Okay. She did it with all the poker face persona that served her in good stead as mayor of Mexico City, one that, eschewing the attempt to force a lofty oratorical style, okay, asserted her authority with understated consistency, both in interviews and on the stump. Voters approved. Scheinbaum's victory also came despite a coordinated international campaign of media and bots that attempted to paint AMLO and MORENA, their party, as being in collusion with drug cartels. This is only a chapter in a non-stop media onslaught that sneered and slandered its way through AMLO's administration without deigning to learn a thing about what was happening underneath its very limited radar. That is what was going on underneath was the organization, the implementation, and the expansion of a social movement. For the election, a gaggle of foreign journalists touched down in Mexico City, rivaling that such a quote machista country unquote could be electing a woman president, and so comfortably. Once again, all of the comfortable tropes, election of states, voters bought off by social programs, a religious populace enthralled to the quote handpicked successor unquote of a messianic leader, were trundled out, anything to avoid granting agency to Mexican voters or seeing what has been happening on the ground, a policy driven process of party realignment in which working class voters scattered across parties in the 2018 election have concentrated in the MORENA party while maintaining the party's cross-class coalition largely intact. After a victory acknowledgement in the Hilton, Sheinbaum made her way to Mexico City's main square, the Zocalo. There she paid homage to the social movements of the past, from workers to students, teachers to farmers, and read out the names of women who have played pivotal roles in Mexico's history. As the latest member of that list, Sheinbaum will have an enormous electoral mandate, even larger than AMLO's. As of October 1st, the Presidente will now be the Presidenta. Cool. The Presidente
Uh,
will now be the Presidenta. Okay, would you like to pick up with the second article?
yes. Let me
Okay,
get that. And that one is from You
the
Are.
Common Dreams article. Would you like me to put it up in the room?
No, I have it here.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Common Dreams. Okay. Let me yeah, let me go get it. Share screen and Common Dreams.
Okay, I'm adding it to the stage now.
Okay. Okay, is it added?
It is added.
Okay, great.
You are good.
Common Dreams. Leftist climate scientist Claudia Sheinbaum wins Mexican presidency in a landslide. And you see all the happiness, rightly so. The close ally of outgoing President Andre Manuel Lopez Obrador is the first woman to win Mexico's presidency. And it is by Jake Johnson.
Who we might rightly call the Dean of Common Dreams Correspondence, which only simply means he's probably the oldest one. Are you still there, Dee? Okay, Dee's having trouble with her sound.
I'm back.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the puppy pulls my mic out.
Oh,
I was like, what's going on here? Uh, Here we go. Leftist Claudia Steinbaum, a close ally of popular outgoing President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, won Mexico's presidential election in a landslide on Sunday, with an official tally showing her leading right-wing opposition candidate Xochitl Galvez by nearly 30 percentage
I
points.
think it's pronounced Cochito.
Okay, Cochico.
Yes.
Galvez called Sheinbaum early Monday to acknowledge the results and concede defeat in what was the largest race in Mexico's history, a contest marred by deadly violence. Sheinbaum, a climate scientist with the former mayor of Mexico City, is set to become the first woman and the first person of Jewish descent to lead Mexico. After Sunday's overwhelming victory, which was a boon to her leftist Morena party. According to official vote tallies, the Washington Post reported Morena and its allies, quote, appeared close to winning a supermajority in Congress, which would allow them to change the Constitution. And this is in quotes, we imagine a plural, diverse, and democratic Mexico, Sheinbaum told cheering supporters on Sunday. Quote, our duty is and will always be to look after each and every Mexican without distinction. Okay. David Adler, excuse me, co-general coordinator of Progressive International, called Sheinbaum and Morena's win epic, whopping, and historic. David Adler, this is from X. And here are the numbers for the Mexican legislature. An epic, whopping, historic victory for Morena and the Fourth Transformation. And it shows Senado, the Senate. Moreno 57 to 60 senadoras. PAN 19 to 22 senadoras. PRI 15 to 18 Ciudadanos. PRD 0 to 3 senadoras. The Verde 10 to 15 senadoras. The PT 9 to 13 senadoras. And MC 4 to 8 senadoras. So you can see that Morena's got a lot.
Yeah, I think that's senadorias means senators.
Yes.
Senado is the Senate, and they're counting the number of senators that they were likely to have. In other words, the final vote totals were not in.
Okay.
Okay, so the 57 to 60 means they'll get 56 to 60 senators,
Okay.
and 19 to 22, 19 to 22 senators, and so on. Okay, so clearly there's a heavy majority of senators in favor, okay, of the Morena party.
And we see this Congress. I mean, it's huge. You know, the Morena has 233 to 251, and all the others are under, 100. I mean, 80 is, the PAN is what, 64 to 80, and everyone else is below that. So you can clearly see the Morena with the 233 to 251.
Yeah, right. And the other article that we just read showed us that uh, there was something like, what was it, 380 out of 500 uh, disputations
Mm-hmm.
were finally won by the Morena party.
Mm-hmm.
So the end result was uh,
Huge.
380 to 120.
Wow. So that's just a huge win.
Yes.
Well, Sunday's contest, which involved more than 20,000 government positions and outcome were unprecedented, some questioned whether the results would be truly transformative for Mexico, where poverty and inequality remain high despite minimum wage hikes and other progress made in recent years under the government of Lopez Obrador, commonly known as AMLO. Quote, AMLO has done a little better for people than the prior governments, and Sheinbaum has pledged to continue his political approach, though with a greater emphasis on sustainability. Tamara Pearson, a Mexican-Australian author, journalist, and activist, wrote for The Nation ahead of Sunday's race. Quote, the pension for informal workers has increased to 6,000 pesos. It's $359 every month, every 2 months.
Every 2 months.
Every 2 months. And the health system for informal workers, which includes most Mexicans, is still extremely lacking but has improved. I'm going to move back for oops. Back here.
Okay, let me add here that the comment there that Scheinbaum would continue the political approach of AMLO, though with a greater emphasis on sustainability, that's a reference to her commitment to climate science.
Okay.
She's going to be very concerned about the environment and the climate crisis and the development of sustainability in Mexico, okay, over time. And that's, of course, in accordance with her particular expertise in the climate science area.
Yeah, the outgoing president has also faced backlash for fuel infrastructure projects that risk damaging indigenous communities and the planet. Manga Bay's Maxwell Radwin noted last week that Sheinbaum, who contributed to a major intergovernmental panel on climate change (IPCC) report, continues to support one of AMLO's most polarizing projects, the Tren Maya, a 1,554 kilometer, 96-mile railroad crossing the Yucatan Peninsula. Despite dozens of legal complaints about deforestation, the destruction of cave ecosystems, and the relocation of indigenous communities, Radwin observed, she's defended the project and even suggested expanding it to a major port in the town of Progreso in northwest Yucatan.
She's probably interested in that port because it probably provides a gateway to Asia.
Oh,
Yes, China.
okay. With Mexico facing a devastating heat wave and other climate impacts, Sheinbaum has pledged to prioritize clean energy development, vowing to, quote, lead a $13.6 billion program to jumpstart Mexico's renewable energy sector, Politico reported. Steinbaum is set to take office in October.
Yes. So to put that a little bit in perspective, population of Mexico is, if I recall correctly, something like, and I may not be absolutely correct about this, 130 billion people. Let's just, yeah, maybe let's just look at that and make sure. Oops.
Oh, hi, Evelina. Evelina's here.
Oh, great. Hi, Evelina. See what the projection is for 2024. Yeah, I was right on the button, actually. The projection is 130 130,739,927 is the population, okay, of Mexico. So that's something like, off the top of my head, 36% of the population of the United States, which is maybe 335 million. Uh, so when we look at population, that project to jumpstart, okay, the renewable energy sector is not really that large. If we were to uh, spend a comparable amount of money, okay, on a renewable energy sector, that would only be about maybe a $40 billion program here, or a $45 billion program here, or even less. Maybe a $36 billion program here.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's not such a huge program. Uh, when we look at the size of Bernie Sanders' program in his campaign in 2020, he was talking about spending $1.6 trillion, okay, on the Green New Deal, okay, in general. And the part that was dedicated to renewable energy was probably something on the order of 600 or 700 billion per year for 10 years. Okay, each year for 10 years. Okay, so in other words, Mexico still has a long way to go to get to programs like that. Of course, the United States still has a long way to go also, because as you know, Bernie was never elected.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Biden's program uh, was pretty small. Okay, over 10 years. I mean, it's shot through with cronyism, and uh, I don't even think that there's 500 billion there over 10 years. So that's the sort of thing we're looking at here. So anyway, for the third of our pieces today,
Mm,
Okay,
Hobie's barking. Let me.
okay. I wanted to go to a video that was done by Ben Norton, and I want to go through parts of that for you at this time. Okay, and Dee and I will comment on various parts of the video. It's a very long video. We won't be able to go through it all, in spite of the fact that we do have a long period for this show. But okay, the title of this video is Mexico's Political Rebellion Following AMLO. New President Claudia Sheinbaum paves the multipolar path. So here we go. There's Ev Norton. Okay,
Some major changes are happening in Mexico.
I'm sorry. Okay, it's Ben Norton. I got his name confused with the old boxer, Ed Norton. Do you remember? The guy who was occasionally fighting Ali. But anyway.
That can have a big influence on the global economy. On the 2nd of June, the people of Mexico went to the ballot box, and the left-wing candidate, Claudia Sheinbaum, won the presidential election in a landslide with 59% of the votes. She represents a direct challenge to the political and economic elites who have dominated Mexico for many decades. Unlike most politicians, she actually comes from.
Okay, you were seeing in the start of this video shots of the Zocalo, that great big square completely full with people. In the center, okay, of Mexico City, there must have been hundreds of thousands of people in that square.
From a working class background, and she's a scientist. She has a PhD in engineering, and she was previously the governor of Mexico City. The second place candidate represented the establishment political parties that had dominated Mexican politics for 100 years. Those parties combined, and yet their candidate could not even get 30% of the vote, just around 28%. And
just to give a little historical context here, the pre-party, the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, was at one time, okay, a revolutionary party. That is to say, it was the center of social movements. It was very important in bringing Mexico up to the modern era. When we're talking modern era in the 1920s, okay, and the 1930s, it even had a very left-wing president, okay, Lázaro Cárdenas, from 1934 to 1940, who put in many social programs, okay, in Mexico, was the FDR of his country. And at the same time, he nationalized the oil industry, which created quite a stir in Mexico. Okay, and in the United States, the American oil companies didn't like it when they were nationalized. Okay, and Cardenas told them to go to hell. One more piece of context, which is important. Uh, since the revolution in 1910 and going forward, the Mexicans instituted a one-party system. The PRI was the single party. Its names would change from time to time, but from 1910 until the 1960s or thereabouts, if I recall my Mexican history correctly, there was just a single party. The PAN party, which was, okay, the PRI was kind of comparable to the Democrats here, or more comparable, okay, to the Democrats here. But it grew conservative as the revolution was institutionalized, as given in the name of the party. It got more and more conservative as time went on. Okay, after Cardenas, it reached a period of consolidation for the next president, who had a 6-year term. All presidents have okay, a 6-year term. Their power in Mexico, the power of the presidency is immense. Okay, Mexico, much greater than the power of the presidency here. And Cardenas and his 6-year term made great progress in modernizing Mexico. Then there was a period of consolidation with the next 2 or 3 presidents. And then the same cycle, which has bothered us here in the United States, the cycle of big money in politics, became increasingly serious for Mexico from the 1960s on. Then at some point during that period, the party system actually split off, and the PAN party, which was very much like our Republican Party, took over. But also the PRI had become a fairly conservative party too. So just as here in the United States, the peasants and workers in Mexico didn't have anybody to represent them. And the first party to represent them in a very long time was the MORENA party, which was built, by AMLO, over many years, and more recently, by Claudia, who was very important in the building of this particular party. And it is the first party that was consciously trying to represent the working classes and the laboring classes in a very, very long time in Mexico. But now it's been victorious in 2 straight elections, each one bringing 6-year terms for the presidency, and in this latest election also the domination of the state governments.
In addition to the presidency, the left-wing Morena party and its coalition allies from the Workers' Party and the Green Party in Mexico, their coalition won a majority in the Congress in both chambers. And Mexico has a federalized system like the US, and many states across Mexico now will have Morena representatives as the governor, including Mexico City. This shows that there is a transformative change happening in Mexico. The political establishment has been thoroughly defeated, and Mexico will be moving to the left at a time of geopolitical crisis. The US has been waging a new Cold War against China and Russia and trying to pressure its allies around the world to break ties. But Mexico has remained firmly independent, maintaining good relations with China and Russia and the US, refusing to take sides in this new Cold War. And Mexico's current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known as AMLO, he is from the same left-wing Morena party of the new president-elect Claudia Sheinbaum. And what they represent is a new political class in Mexico that is not simply going to subordinate its interests to the United States. They want their country to be a power in the world, to be independent. They want their sovereignty to be respected. The current president, AMLO, nationalized the lithium reserves in Mexico, and he also fully nationalized the oil in the country that had been partially privatized by a previous US-backed right-wing president. Under AMLO, the Mexican government has been criticizing the US for meddling in its internal affairs, and Mexico has called for the US to stop carrying out aggressive policies against countries in the global south. Mexico has called for the end to the illegal US unilateral sanctions against Cuba, and Mexico has tried to unify Latin America as a bloc so the countries of the region can work together to lift themselves out of poverty and economically develop. And people in Mexico have seen very tangible results under President AMLO. The minimum wage has been raised by more than 80% in real terms, that is adjusted for inflation. Poverty has fallen. Incomes have significantly increased for most working people in Mexico. And this explains why President AMLO has an 80% approval rating, according to the US polling firm Gallup. That makes him one of the most popular leaders on earth. I recently made another video about that, which I will link to in the description below. Now, Mexico is a very important country geopolitically.
Okay, just to add just a little to that. And of course, Claudia Sheinbaum has promised to continue the increases in, okay, the minimum wage. So if it's undergone an improvement of 80% now, okay, in the 6 years, practically doubling, we perhaps can look forward, hopefully, to another doubling under Sheinbaum in her 6 years. I think she's certainly going to try to do that.
In addition to being the neighbor of the United States, Mexico is the 10th most populous country on earth. Its population is bigger than that of Japan. And Mexico has the world's 12th largest economy. The Mexican economy is large, polling firm Gallup. That makes him one of the most popular leaders on earth. I recently made another video about that, which I will link to in the description below. Now, Mexico is a very important country geopolitically. In addition to being the neighbor of the United States, Mexico is...
Okay, I didn't want to freeze that and comment on that. Okay, for a second, as the 10th largest country, okay, in the world, the rank, of course, is important, and it's important that it's bigger than Japan, okay, and Ethiopia. But the population of Russia right now, for comparison, is 150 million or so people, maybe 153 million, compared to Mexico's 130 million. So population-wise, population of Mexico is comparable to the population of Russia. It's nowhere near Brazil, which is, I think, roughly 220 million people right now, something like that. But it is comparable to Russia, and of course, it has a potential also to become a very, very powerful nation, much more powerful than it is right now. I did want to say that.
Is the 10th most populous country on earth. Its population is bigger than that of Japan. And Mexico has the world's 12th largest economy. The Mexican economy is larger than that of Italy, South Korea, and Spain. And in Latin America, Mexico has the second biggest economy. Mexico also has a lot of very important natural resources, including oil and lithium, which have been nationalized by the government. They're state-owned. But it also produces gold, silver, copper, lead, zinc, and natural gas. And of course, Mexico is also a major producer of agricultural products. But in addition to raw materials, Mexico actually has a growing manufacturing sector, and its top exports are not raw materials, in fact. Among its top exports are cars, trucks, computers, and other electronics. And as the US is waging this new Cold War against China, it is pressuring companies to end their investments in China and instead friendshore or nearshore. What we've seen is a massive increase of international investments in Mexico because the US, Mexico, and Canada have a free trade agreement. So now what we see is many US companies, but also many Chinese companies are investing in Mexico, including, for instance, Chinese electric vehicle companies like BYD, the world's leading EV manufacturer, and even Tesla is discussing making a big factory in Mexico as well. So Mexico's geopolitical position is very important and strategic in this moment. And now that the current government is left-wing, led by President AMLO, and the future president is going to be left-wing from the same political party, Claudia Sheinbaum, it is very likely that U.S. government pressure on Mexico is going to continue to increase. We've already seen some examples of this. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the lobby group that represents U.S. corporations, warned that with the victory of Sheinbaum in the Mexican election, there are many risks. And as an example of some of those risks, the U.S. corporate lobby group warned of the so-called protectionism going on under Mexico's left-wing government. That is, President López Obrador, AMLO, He nationalized the lithium and renationalized the oil. He also nationalized the electrical grid. And the US lobby group warns about AMLO's fourth transformation, which is the progressive movement that he declared that, as the Chamber of Commerce notes, wants to confront Mexico's elite and return equality, power, and resources to the country's masses. They portray that in negative terms, but this is true democracy. And they also are very much concerned that some US corporations will not be able to exploit the large natural resources in Mexico. Immediately after Sheinbaum won the election, the US corporate media also started warning that her government is bad for foreign investors and it won't put the interests of US corporations above the Mexican people. So there are many articles in the corporate media warning of her victory spooking markets and scaring off foreign investors. So joining me today to discuss what Sheinbaum's victory and Morena's landslide victory in Mexico will mean, not only for the country, but for Latin America and for the entire world, I spoke with the journalist Jose Luis Granados Ceja, who is the co-organizer of the group Mexico Solidarity Media, and he is the co-host of the podcast Soberanía, which is a show dedicated to helping to explain to an English language audience what is truly going on in Mexico, cutting through a lot of the propaganda in the corporate media. I will link to his show and social media account in the description below. Without further...
Okay, so this is very, very useful to you, just this one contact. If you can go to this English language outlet, there will be lots of information running counter to what you get, okay, from the U.S. mainstream news about what is going on, okay, in Mexico. It's certainly going to be true that the narrative on Mexico coming out of the mainstream press here is going to be very biased and very anti the Sheinbaum administration. It was somewhat biased and somewhat anti the AMLO administration, but probably will be even more so for the Sheinbaum administration because, well, for one thing, she's a woman, of course. Okay, but she's trying, to extend the revolution and to put, much greater emphasis on doing something about the climate as well, so she can expect a negative reaction from our press. And the link that you're getting here is a very important link to get a counter perspective, I think. So you should note that and learn from it.
Further ado, here's our wide-ranging discussion. Jose Luis, thank you for joining me. It's a real pleasure having you. Let's talk about who the next president of Mexico is, Claudia Sheinbaum. I mentioned in the introduction that she's a scientist. She has a PhD in energy engineering. She was the governor of Mexico City, and she won in a massive landslide with 59% of the vote. That is more than double the second place candidate, Galvez, who only had 28%. So this is a massive Democratic mandate. Can you talk about why you think that she won in such a landslide and what people in Mexico are expecting from President Sheinbaum?
I mean, what an incredible victory. What an incredible moment to be part of, to be on the ground, to see history happen. And I think a lot of attention has been put on the fact that it's the first woman president. That shouldn't be discounted. It's quite extraordinary. The fact that she's somebody who comes from an ethnic religious minority in a heavily Catholic country. And I think that actually says something. And some of the discourse has been a little bit confused around this. I've seen a lot of chatter online about the fact that, she is of Jewish descent. She's culturally Jewish. She's not really a practicing in the religious sense. But the fact that it was a non-factor. Mexicans didn't care about that. They voted for her because she represented the continuity of the fourth transformation of Mexico. And I think that's the part that I would emphasize when we're thinking about Claudia Sheinbaum. And it's interesting also because it's an extraordinary profile. As you said in your introduction, climate scientist, member of a group of scientists who won a Nobel Prize, has a doctorate, educated in the US, But, if you actually go back a little bit into her history, she cut her teeth in the student movement, defending the right to education. There's even a picture of her protesting a Mexican government when she was studying in the US. This is a woman who has made her career of defending the interests of the working class, of the marginalized, just really quite an extraordinary profile. And I think that if she was running in some Western European country for some liberal party, she would be a darling. She'd be on all the headlines. Oh, the future is female, that kind of thing. But of course, no. She's running on behalf of a political project that is threatening the interests of US capital, that is defending national resources and national sovereignty. And so that's why you see this effort to kind of minimize who she is. I think the country is incredibly excited about what it represents. One thing to be part of that history, I did an interview with the coordinator of young women, Gracia Alzaga, and she said, this is something that we're doing for our great-grandmothers, our grandmothers, that we're being elected not just into the legislature, but to the highest office in power. That's really significant. I mean, my mother, when she was born, women didn't have the right to vote here in Mexico, and now we have a female president. But policy-wise, like I mentioned, she's going to continue the transformation. What does that mean? Well, we've seen it under López Obrador, historic investment in the most marginalized areas of the country, this effort to attend to the needs of the working class, putting them front and center. I often say we should admit that this is a government that is polyclassist, right? There are different classes represented, but who's in the driver's seat? It's the working class. Their interests are first. That's why we've seen an increase in the minimum wage. That's why we've seen an increase in the standard of living. This is why we've seen a dramatic drop in poverty. 5 million people who used to be living in poverty no longer, and it's thanks to the investments. Some of the infrastructure, the mainstream media loves to talk about López Obrador's pet projects, right? They're not pet projects. Projects like the Trans-Isthmus Corridor, the Tren Maya, these are historical investments in the most forgotten parts of the country, to finally pay attention to them. And she's committed to carrying that out, to following through. And I'll end with this, because one of the things she always talked about on the campaign trail, which I think speaks to the way that she kind of envisions her government. López Obrador, when he came in, basically had to clean house. The country was in very dire straits. We were in the midst of a very serious political crisis. And he, in fact, you made a great point here, sharing the information from a Gallup poll. He's restored faith in Mexico's institutions. And she has talked about building the second floor of that. She gets to build on that foundation that López Obrador is leaving. I think she is very well positioned. We've rescued the state oil company. Now we'll have more resources to be able to invest in the population. I'm a family man, and I can't wait to see what Claudia Sheinbaum does for Mexico and for me and my working class family.
You mentioned the fourth.
So that was a wonderful, heartfelt statement by someone who obviously loves Sheinbaum. Let's see if we can get a little more perspective now.
Transformation. This is something that was declared by the current left-wing president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known popularly simply as AMLO. And can you talk about what he means by the fourth transformation? It's this kind of almost revolutionary process. And also, can you talk about the political party that both López Obrador and Sheinbaum are part of, which is the Morena party, which stands as an acronym. It stands for the National Regeneration Movement, and kind of its origins going back to the Cardenistas, which, this goes back to the Mexican Revolution in the 1910s. And there was this very left-wing nationalist president, Lázaro Cárdenas, who famously in the 1930s, he nationalized the oil company. And then later, future governments also nationalized the energy grid. This is something that AMLO really emphasized when in his 6-year term in Mexico. The presidential terms are 6 years. And in fact, in 2023, AMLO held this huge rally honoring the anniversary of the nationalization of oil. And he celebrated the fact that under AMLO, Mexico has nationalized its lithium. So can you talk about what the fourth transformation is, what Morena is, and what they represent in Mexican politics?
I think it would be correct to view Morena as the people who have inherited that legacy of being associated with that very long, very rich left-wing tradition in Mexico. And it's been a bit of a confused history, right? We had the Mexican Revolution, the first revolution in the Western Hemisphere of the 20th century, a huge social uprising that really was only eclipsed by the Russian Revolution, right? It was very significant. We've seen mass participation of an armed struggle against dictatorship, against the interests of transnational capital in the day. And that actually ties into this moniker of the fourth transformation. So what does he mean when he talks about that? The first
Okay, just to say something here. One of the reasons why this video is so valuable is because it does give you the historical context and talks, okay, quite a lot about it to English speaking audiences. I'm sure that most of you watching this haven't had that kind of a familiarity with the revolution in Mexico, okay, and the years following.
Transformation was the independence struggle, right? The effort to free Mexico of the yoke of Spanish colonial rule. The second transformation was the liberal period under Benito Juárez, who implemented these liberal reforms in that period. In the 19th century, we know there was a lot of struggle between liberal and conservative forces. And then the third being the revolution. And this one now, I think you're right. I mean, it's on the par of revolutionary change. That's how significant it is. And in fact, when he threw that slogan out there, that moniker, they used to be like, how arrogant of Lopez Obrador, how dare he put himself on the same level? Well, we're almost at the end of his term now. And I think it's safe to say that this is the fourth transformation. It does rise to that level. It's not just, another party was elected. It was a change of regime. It was a change of the actual order of things in this country, and consolidated now with this election result in 2024. And so, Morena was actually only founded 10 years ago in 2014. And it was born as a result of the fact that the left was basically orphaned. So we had the Mexican Revolution, and that process was probably its highest expression was Lázaro Cárdenas, as you mentioned. He was a general in the Mexican Revolution, and he very much wanted to actually fulfill the commitments that the whole process had actually made to the population of redistributing land, above all, of using the natural resources of the country, the incredible wealth that exists in Mexico, for the benefit of the population. But obviously that process kind of started to degrade in a sense. There was the foundation of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, which is such a funny name, right? It's such a contradiction of terms, institutional revolution. And it became very much, as they said, a one-party dictatorship in Mexico. Even though it had nominal elections, they ran the show. They had very corporatist, clientelistic networks. And they were ousted in the year 2000 when Vicente Fox was elected on behalf of the right-wing National Action Party. And a lot of liberal commentators and pundits would talk about this as being Mexico's transition, right? As being when, it finally became a liberal democracy. The truth is, and I think it's important to understand why we saw the result that we did this Sunday here in Mexico, is that I call it the false democratic transition. It was very much, for our viewers here in the United States, kind of like the duopoly. You had two parties that were alternating in power, but the policies never substantially changed. The same figures were in power. The same kind of thinkers and the think tanks and all of the people who had any influence over the government rarely changed. And that does not represent a democratic transition. And I'll tell you why. It's because the population never really felt any kind of consequence to that so-called democracy. What did it matter to the person who didn't have enough money to pay for their medicines that now the PAN was in power? Nothing. That's not democracy. It's all form, right?
To look at the analogy, okay, in U.S. politics. Of course, we had the revolution of Franklin Roosevelt, okay, in the 1930s, and the domination of U.S. politics by the Democratic Party, okay, until, even though there were some interruptions at the presidential level in congressional politics, okay, the Democrats were dominating everything until the Reagan Revolution. Okay, and the Reagan Revolution, of course, was thought to be a transformation. And it was in some ways, but in economics, it was a neoliberal transformation. And the Democrats also followed along, went along, okay, the neoliberal route. So a Democratic Party that had been becoming more conservative, okay, in the 1970s, then became even more conservative because it was aping Reagan and his particular successes. And it created the same thing that we saw in Mexico. The workers here, the working class here, okay, and the lower middle class and the middle class hasn't had a president that represented it and hasn't had a Congress that represented it in a very long time. It's been but technically a democratic system. But as we know, with the media participation the way it is, okay, and the military industrial complex and the other industrial complexes, the health industrial complex and everything else, it's become a system which does not represent the people, but only represents, okay, the donors. In Mexico, there's been a revolution to try to stop that. It is the AMLO revolution, now the AMLO Sheinbaum revolution. It's an example to us. It's something we really need here.
Right? There's no depth to it. And I think really the democratic transition happened under López Obrador, under Morena, right? I was talking about how it was only founded in 2014. It's extraordinary to see how such a young party can go from being founded to winning the presidency, to winning the majority of governorship races, to now consolidating with what is effectively can be called a re-election of the party's program under Claudia Sheinbaum. Of course, we should mention López Obrador didn't run for re-election because he's constitutionally prohibited from doing so. But it shows the population has faith in this. They understand that this is an authentic transition. This is a fourth transformation of Mexico. And Morena is full of left-wing voices and thinkers, right? If you're curious, because I find it so frustrating, so many people, I don't know why, but they insist on being the judges of what is or isn't leftist enough. And there's always these scare quotes around leftist President López Obrador. Take a look at the educational materials that the National Formation Institute of the party is offering, right? It's very much grounded in dialectical analysis, materialist analysis, the emphasis on class struggle, on the emphasis of needing to redistribute wealth, of confronting the interests of the oligarchy of capital. How is that not leftist? Just because he has, obeys some of the rules of macroeconomic stability? Yeah, of course. Mexico can't build a project that it threatens U.S. capital in the sense that would put it in a weakened position and could effectively doom the actual program of the party. And I think they've actually done a really good job of balancing that. We also have a very well mobilized, well organized party, a militancy. This was a huge election. Over 20,000 posts were being contested, from local representatives to the governorships, to the senators, to the federal Congress, the local Congress, obviously the presidency. And at these polling locations, I was accompanying many election observers. Morena was there, supervising the vote, participating. And that's thanks to an organized party apparatus that is interested in actually being consequential, to be a mass party.
Yeah, you mentioned some very important points there. One is the fact that, Mexico has this massive border it shares with the United States. It's a constant sword of Damocles hanging over its head. And now we see many Republicans in the US, including Trump and his allies, threatening to invade Mexico in the name of fighting cartels, if that's the excuse, right? But this is being very seriously considered, and it's a threat. And AMLO himself has condemned this and said famously, we are not a US colony, we are not a US protectorate. And what's interesting is to see how he has defended his country's sovereignty directly to the face of top US officials. There was actually a funny virtual meeting that I saw between López Obrador and Kamala Harris, the US vice president. And she, of course, doesn't really know much about international politics. And in this meeting, this virtual meeting, López Obrador quoted this famous quote from Porfirio Díaz, who infamously said that in Mexico, we are cursed because we are so far from God, so close to the United States. AMLO said this in the meeting, and Kamala Harris apparently didn't really get it. But I do want to talk about that later on. The geopolitics, of course, something that I focus on a lot here. especially now with the new Cold War against China and Russia. But before that, I want to talk a little bit more about the internal situation in Mexico. Now, you talked about how Morena has become this serious national force. And this is important because the narrative for several years has been that basically AMLO, that he is a personalized, charismatic leader. And it's true, he is a very charismatic leader. He's very popular. This recent poll by Gallup shows that he has 80% support, making him one of the most popular leaders on earth. But basically, the argument was that Morena only exists in order to support AMLO, and it's not a real party. That was the narrative we heard for several years. The fact that Sheinbaum won with nearly 60% of the vote, this massive landslide, and Morena won many seats for the governors of many states across Mexico, including Mexico City, and Morena and its political allies from the Workers' Party and the Green Party have a majority in both chambers of Congress, shows that this is not just about López Obrador as the isolated figure, that it is a national movement. And it shows that they were able to break the back of the establishment political parties that have dominated Mexican politics for the entire modern history of Mexico for 100 years. You mentioned the Institutional Revolutionary Party, the PRI, which ironically, it actually does have in its very early origins, these kind of left-wing origins. In fact, Lázaro Cárdenas was the leader of the party, and the idea was they were going to institutionalize the gains of the revolution, right? But over the years, they moved to the right, especially in the neoliberal era, and there was a lot of corruption in the party. So what we saw is that in the past 3 elections, AMLO was one of the main candidates, and there's a lot of evidence suggesting that he actually won the 2012 election, but there was a lot of shady corruption going on. There was this Colombian hacker who later admitted to stealing votes and all this. But anyway, the point is that finally in 2018, AMLO was this national figure, and he was very popular, and he was able to win the election. And of course, he helped to build Morena, but it is not just AMLO. So can you talk about the political structures in Mexico? It seems to me that basically Morena has been able to break those political structures. You mentioned the alternation between the PRI and PAN parties. And basically, it seems like those parties are dead. We saw that the PRI, the neoliberal party, which controlled Mexico for almost 100 years, the PAN, which is the right-wing, explicitly very conservative party, kind of closely allied with the Republicans in the US, and the supposedly center-left Social Democratic Party, the PRD, they actually formed an alliance to run candidates together, and they were completely crushed. And their candidate was Xochitl Gálvez, who was from the right of the coalition, and she couldn't even get 30% of the vote. And again, these are coming from a combined coalition of the parties that controlled Mexican politics for a century. I mean, this is truly incredible. Can you talk about that shift and what the future of Mexican politics could look like now?
Yeah, I'd love to begin by addressing a bit of the figure of López Obrador, because you're right. I think the people who are trying to cast the party as just a vehicle for his personal ambition are people who just don't have the right criteria to understand what's happening in Mexico. So certainly, he is a figure that in a lot of ways is larger than life. And I think it's correct to call him a political animal. And I think what we witnessed on Sunday, the transformation that he's led throughout his government, as you mentioned, the displacing of the old regime and the old political parties, it wouldn't have been possible without a figure like him. And I think he deserves the credit for leading this process in the way that he did. The landslide victory in 2018, where he became president, it also meant a very strong majority in the Congress, so he was free to freely implement his program and actually engage in this transformation. That, I think, was a very, very important moment in Mexico's modern political history, and it wouldn't have been possible without López Obrador. But to think that it's just about him and his pieces on the chessboard and his party and all that is to misunderstand what it is. It is a vehicle for those democratic transformational aspirations of the Mexican population. You mentioned the PRD. The PRD was meant to be that, but we were orphaned. They became a thoroughly neoliberal party. They signed what in Mexico came to be known as the Pact for Mexico, together with Peña Nieto in 2012, and promoted a bunch of outright neoliberal economic and political reforms.
I'm sorry to cut you off, just for people who don't know. Enrique Peña Nieto was the president before López Obrador from 2012 to 2018 from the PRI party. He was a complete neoliberal who tried to privatize the state-owned oil industry. And AMLO, when he came in, he pledged to reverse all of those neoliberal policies implemented under
And in fact,
Peña Nieto.
Yeah, and it successfully did, right? And so this idea that it's just his is untrue, and that somehow Claudia isn't going to be able to successfully lead it, I think they're mistaken. There was a very competitive process to select who the candidate was going to be in this election. There was a lot of, well-known figures, Marcelo Ebrard, who was the former foreign minister, Adán Augusto López, who was the former interior minister, Gerardo Noroña, who is a figure that many people in left-wing movements are familiar with. They all competed. Ultimately, Claudia came on top, and even there was a moment there where there was a risk that the party might split. Like, let's be honest about that. Marcelo Ebrard was unhappy that he did not get the nomination, but ultimately he rectified and said, no, I'm going to continue to be part of this movement because I understand that it's important to be united. That unity is still there. There's obviously difference of opinion and lots of different kinds of, there are no factions, but there are different kind of currents and ways of thinking. But suffice it to say, Claudia Sheinbaum is very much in charge. She is now the leader of the party. She is the leader of this government. She's the president-elect, and she's going to be the one to carry this transformation forward and to give it its own character. It's going to be a little bit different, right? So much of the mainstream media tried to emphasize that, she lives in his shadow. They tried to do the same thing with Dilma in Brazil, saying that, these women will never be able, which is a pretty sexist view, to be honest. Anybody who thinks that Claudia Sheinbaum is not going to be able to take command of the country and of this political transformation is somebody who's unfamiliar with her work. She is a determined, hardworking, leftist woman who is very well positioned to be able to carry this forward. And I think that's a lot of what we should be expecting in terms of this new government. And I think one of the key things that I would emphasize is that, there has been this unfortunate situation, which is so common in any kind of left-wing administration, where when your political adversaries lose power, political power, they turn and they hide in their conservative strongholds. And here in Mexico, I would say there's basically three. So there's the private media. The attacks against López Obrador are constant, although he's been very smart to do these morning press conferences to kind of change the narrative every day. There is the support from US imperialism. And then there's also the judicial branch of government, which is thoroughly corrupt and thoroughly in bed with the old regime. And so they're going to try to conspire against the Claudia Sheinbaum government from these conservative strongholds. I think the duty of the left-wing forces is to displace them even from these places where they've taken refuge. And so the proposal that was made at one point was what became to be known as the Plan C here in Mexico, which is let's win a supermajority in the next election so we don't need to go negotiate with anybody, and we can do constitutional reforms, and we can fix the judicial branch of government, and we can make these more serious transformations in terms of, in the legislature. And it was a lofty goal. I think in a lot of ways, people thought it was a possibility, but a remote possibility. But if we look at the results, certainly in the lower house of Congress, Morena and its allies secured that 2/3 supermajority. They don't need to negotiate with the opposition. The possibilities are endless. And I do think it opens up the potential for a much deeper transformation, something that goes much more seriously against this. In fact, if you look at the way that they're responding now, suddenly the people who dominated us, who ridiculed the population, who said that we didn't deserve to rule, well, now they're talking about how they're the poor, persecuted minority, and their rights must be respected. Oh, please listen to us, because you can't forget that there are other opinions in this country. Well, you know what? When you receive 60% of the vote, that's an incredible mandate. Throughout the world, especially in places like Western Europe, Canada, you can receive less than a majority and have majority control of your legislature, the executive, or whatever you want, right? And they'll pretend that that's legitimate. Well, here in Mexico, there's nothing more legitimate than that mandate. They have every right, and I hope they follow through on it, to actually do those deeper transformations, to finally go after that rotten judicial branch of government, to push them out of those conservative strongholds, to weaken them. I do a lot of work with Venezuela, and Hugo Chavez has this incredible speech where he really well synthesizes Gramsci's conception of hegemony. Well, Morena and the forces that support it are establishing their new hegemony. And that's quite significant in terms of actually understanding that, it's not an exaggeration to say that this is truly a watershed moment. How will they be able to respond? We quite possibly could be before a moment where these old pro-oligarchy forces will not be able to recover. And that means that the interests of the working class will always be front and center. And you know what that means? That means we can actually start talking about things like the communalization of life, of actually breaking with these kind of straitjackets that capitalism imposes on us. Obviously, and I think we'll probably get into this a little bit later, there is still, and I think one of the major challenges is US imperialism. I think the more that they feel isolated, as we've seen in Bolivia, as we've seen in Nicaragua, as we've seen in Venezuela, right, as we've seen in Cuba, the opposition and their forces will run into the arms of imperialism because that's the only place where they feel like they have any hope of recovering the power that they lost.
So,
okay, I think that this video summarizes so much and gives us so much in the area of really good analysis. It tells us what has happened, in Mexico. It tells us there has been a real transformation there, a very, very great, transformation. And it gives us, the possibilities. I think I may come back to the rest of this video on Tuesday, because I think what's happened, in Mexico, is very important, and maybe very important also as a model for what can happen here, in the United States. Really significant changes, have gone on there and are continuing to go on. And this victory was enormously significant for the future. So I think I'll stop it here, and we'll come back to it, on Tuesday. Dee?
Yes, that was very good, very informative.
I wondered if we won't have time now to go to Pepe's article. And I wonder if you'd like to read that one.
Well, right now, there's kind of a lot of noise here.
Okay, so in that case, I will proceed to read Pepe's article. Have you anything more you want to say about the Ben Norton video?
It was, I liked the way he presented it, and it was also really telling it the huge population, the huge amount of support. And now you look at the people that are complaining because of the fact of the large margin.
Yeah, they're complaining because of the large margin. There's a lot of sour grapes, of course. But what they're really claiming, I'm upset about, is that they've lost most of their power.
Yes.
And they won't even be able to get the kinds of compromises they could get, in the AMLO period.
Right.
From Claudia. If she wants to pursue the revolution that AMLO started, at this point, she has very close to a free hand. So I think that we can look forward to, we can hope that she's going to continue with the revolution and do what's good for the people, of Mexico, and serve as a model for what we could have here, okay, in the United States, if we can bring our conservative forces under control.
Yes.
I don't know if we can. We've talked here quite a lot about the importance, okay, of dumping the corruption. They evidently have a problem with the judiciary down in Mexico, which is very similar to the problem that we have with the judiciary up here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, to change it, change that problem here, we're going to have to make major changes to the Supreme Court. We're going to have to expand the Supreme Court. Of course, there's a bill on the table in Congress now to expand it by 4 people, but you can be sure that if the Democrats, uh, even if they win the House and the Senate, okay, and the presidency, if they move to expand things by 4 people, they will probably be very careful to make sure that the 4 people they choose are not too anti-corporate. Okay, since I think the court now is very deceptive. We look at it as liberals and conservatives, and 6 conservatives, and we look at the problem in the court as one of overwhelming the 6 conservatives by adding 4 more liberals. But if those 4 more liberals are the kinds of neoliberals, pro-corporate, that Biden or someone like him is likely to nominate, okay, for the Supreme Court and get confirmed for the Supreme Court, then we won't be solving the pro-corporate problem, okay, inside of the Supreme Court. Okay, I would say that of all the Supreme Court justices right now,
Mm-hmm.
probably only Ketanji Brown Jackson is likely to try to make really major changes to the corporate attack on social programs. Perhaps she would be joined by Sotomayor. She probably wouldn't be joined very much by Elena Kagan, who's always been pretty pro-corporate herself. To introduce real changes into the Supreme Court, I think we need more than 6 or perhaps even 8, okay, additional judges to the Supreme Court. And they have to be people who are progressives, who understand the corporate takeover, okay, of the United States, and the need to reverse that particular takeover, so legislation that's in favor of the interests of the people can be passed and can be sustained by the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
So, on that note, I would like to shift your attention to another very good piece by Pepe Escobar, our favorite journalist these days, who had a piece that was about a week ago, and I keep saving it. Haven't had a chance to go over it, but I'm going to take the opportunity tonight. The title of the piece is Russia, SCO, BRICS, the normalization, okay, of Afghanistan. SCO, of course, is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Don't know whether you're all familiar with that yet, but it is a very big organization. It's bigger than BRICS, okay, at this point. And it's not restricted to economics. It's about the cooperation across the board, and in the future, it's going to work in tandem with BRICS to change the world. So Pepe published this on June 1st, so it's been hanging around for about a week or so. I was meaning to cover it in 3 other programs, but I never could get around to it. Here's a photo of the Taliban. The Taliban, okay, the caption reads, "The whole Russia-Taliban affair involves a humongous package encompassing oil, gas, also minerals, and loads of rail connectivity. So there's agreement in town. Past Sunday in Doha, I had a meeting with three high-level representatives of the Taliban political office in Qatar, said Pepe Escobar, including a founding member of the body in 2012 and a key official of the previous Taliban government of 1996 to 2001. By mutual consent, their names should not be made public. The cordial meeting was brokered by Professor Sultan Barakat, who teaches at the College of Public Policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University, set in an outstanding, immaculate campus outside of Doha, which attracts students from across the global south. Professor Barakat is one of those very few discreet players who knows everything that matters in West Asia. And in his case, also in the intersection of Central and South Asia. With my three Taliban interlocutors, we talked extensively about the changes of the new Taliban era, new development projects, the role of Russia, China, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They were particularly curious about Russia and posed several questions. Professor Barakat is working on a parallel angle. He is conducting the work of the Afghanistan Future Thought Forum, whose 9th session took place in Oslo in mid-May and was attended by 28 Afghans, men and women, as well as an array of diplomats of Iran, Pakistan, India, China, Turkey, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the EU, okay, among others. So I find it interesting that this was not a meeting that excluded the West. The key discussions at the forum revolve around the extremely complex issue of the Taliban engagement with that fuzzy entity, the quote, international community, unquote. In Doha, I directly asked my three interlocutors, what is the Taliban's number one priority? Quote, the end of sanctions, unquote, they replied. For that to happen, the UN Security Council must overturn its 2003 decision of designating several members of the Taliban as a terrorist organization. Simultaneously, discrimination, demonization, sanctions by Washington need to go. As it stands, that remains an immensely tall order. The forum, the next section should be held possibly in the fall, is patiently working step by step. It's a matter of successive concessions from both sides, building trust, and for that it's essential to appoint an UN-recognized mediator or, quote, advisor for normalization to supervise the whole process. In this case, full support by UN Security Council members, Russia and China will be essential. We're the Taliban, and we mean business. I left the meeting in Qatar with the impression that positive steps ahead in terms of the normalization of Afghanistan as a whole are possible. And then some magical intervention turned the whole game around. The day after our meeting, before I left Doha for Moscow, both the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Justice informed President Putin that the Taliban could be excluded from the Russian list of terrorist organizations. The exceptionally competent Zamir Kabulov, Putin's special representative for Afghanistan, went straight to the point. Without the Taliban's removal from a list, Russia cannot recognize the new administration in Kabul. And just like clockwork, on the same day, Moscow invited the Taliban to attend the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, SPIEF, which starts next Wednesday. Now, next Wednesday is this past Wednesday. Kabulov noted how, quote, because SPIEF is going on right now, Kabulov noted how, quote, traditionally the Afghans are interested in continuing cooperation on the purpose of petroleum products in Russia and other goods of high demand. Of course, in the future, it will be possible to talk about transit capabilities of Afghanistan to expand trade turnover. And then Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, also on the same day in Tashkent during Putin's official visit, all but clinched the deal, saying that the normalization of the Taliban reflects objective reality. Quote, they are the real power. We are not indifferent to Afghanistan. Our allies, especially in Central Asia, are not indifferent to it either. So this process reflects an awareness of reality. Kazakhstan has already manifested its, quote, awareness of reality, unquote. The Taliban was out of Astana's terror list last year. In Russia, in practice, the Taliban will be excluded from the terror list if the Supreme Court approves it. That may even happen within the next 2 months. The Supreme Court we're talking about here, of course, is the Russian Supreme Court, not the U.S. Supreme Court. This love affair comes with a huge package, says Pepe. The normalization of Russia-Taliban ties is inevitable for several reasons. The main priority is certainly related to regional security, implying joint efforts to fight the hazy, dark, destabilizing role of ISIS-K, a terror ISIS spinoff that is actively supported in the shade by CIA/MI6 as a divide and rule tool. FSB Director Alexander Bortnikov, that's of Russia, is fully aware that a stable Afghanistan means a stable Taliban government. And that sentiment is fully shared by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a whole. Afghanistan is a SCO observer. Inevitably, it will become a full member within the next 2 years at most, consolidating its normalization. Then there's the connectivity corridor bonanza ahead, which matters as much to Russia as to China. Beijing is building another road engineering marvel across the Wakhan corridor to connect Xinjiang to northeastern Afghanistan. And the plan is to bring the Kabul as part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the CPEC, lightning speed geoeconomic integration. But isn't that amazing? I mean, this is just the changes that are happening before our eyes that are given no visibility in the U.S. mass media. But what we can only cover in outlets like this. Moscow, as well as New Delhi, are eyeing the spin-offs of the multimodal international north-south transportation corridor, the INSTC, linking Russia, Iran, and India. The port of Chabahar in Iran is an essential road for the India Silk Road to connect it to Afghanistan and beyond to Central Asian markets. Then there's the still not exploited Afghan mineral wealth worth at least $1 trillion. Lithium included. Kabul is also planning to build no less than a Russian hub to export energy to Pakistan, all part of an upcoming PAC-Russian strategic energy deal. So Russia is expanding its economic ties with Pakistan, which historically has been an American preserve, but that is really changing now. What Putin said to Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif on the sidelines of the SCO summit in Samarkand in 2022 is immensely significant. The objective is to deliver pipeline gas from Russia to Pakistan. Some infrastructure is already in place in Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. Afghanistan now enters the picture. We're talking about the integration of the stands here, folks. As connectivity corridors go, there's a new huge kid on the block. According to a memorandum of understanding signed in Tashkent in November 2023, on the sidelines of the SCO International Transport Forum, that's the Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan transport corridor, going from Belarus to Pakistan, and of course, also from Belarus, from there into Europe. The missing piece in this fascinating puzzle is to connect what is already on. Railways spanning Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, with a brand new Pakistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan railway. The last two sections of this Pak-Afghan-Uz project began construction only a few months ago. It was exactly this project that was featured in the joint statement issued by Putin and Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev earlier this week in Tashkent. As TASS reported, quote, Putin and Mirziyoyev rated positively the first meeting of the working group on development of the multimodal transport corridor, Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, that took place on April 23rd, 2024, in the Uzbek city of Termez, unquote. So the whole Russia-Taliban affair involves a humongous package encompassing oil, gas, minerals, and loads of rail connectivity. There's no doubt a lot of juicy extra details would emerge at the upcoming St. Petersburg Forum, as a Taliban delegation, including their labor minister and the head of the Chamber for Commerce and Industry, will be there. And there's more. Afghanistan, under Taliban 2.0, is bound to be invited to the upcoming BRICS Plus Summit next October in Kazan. Talk about a mega strategic convergence. The UN Security Council better hurry up to normalize Afghanistan for the, quote, international community, unquote. Oh, wait, who cares? When Russia, China, the SCO, and BRICS are already doing it, yes, who cares? Who cares whether the UN can function or not? There are new institutions that are going to be functioning, and they're going to be integrating Afghanistan into the international community. This was republished from the Strategic Culture Foundation. We did not actually pick it up there, and the reason for that is that the Strategic Culture Foundation is unacceptable on Facebook. And since we stream to Facebook, we could not stream it from the Strategic Culture Foundation site. We had to go to the unz.com site of Ron Unz, which is an aggregator site. And I have to say, thank God for Ron Unz and his superior aggregation site. So that was an article that gave us completely new news about what's happening in Asia, and a further step towards the integration, of Asia, and even towards the integration of Europe and Asia, because from Belarus, it's a hop, skip, and a jump into the heart of Europe, of course. So there it is, a very important post by Pepe Escobar, that we wanted, okay, to give to you. So I will now go to discussion. But D, you are muted. If you can
Yes,
unmute.
I can unmute now. Before we had the dogs carrying on, singing going on.
Okay. Any comments on that post by Pepe?
Oh, it was very good as usual, and you made the good point that the West doesn't cover or doesn't let people really. You have to go to particular sites to get the information, and some sites they won't even allow you to present on YouTube or a Facebook or anything. So at least there's an outlet where you can go to get this information. The West is just so blind on what's going on in the world.
And also, the American people are so blind because they
Yeah.
don't get, okay, this information. They have no idea what's going on, okay, in the Eurasia area.
No, they don't. And
They have no idea about the integration of Asia that's going on, the economic strength that is being built there. And that economic strength is a prelude to military strength at some point. There is not an aggressive military situation coming from there, but there could be a defensive military situation that is really very, very significant for the hegemon, so called, as we go forward. I think the hegemon is no longer the hegemon.
no.
And this is true in part because of the kinds of integrative movements that we saw, okay, in that article.
Yes, and something too that was presented, that was discussed, was with the late president of Iran, President Raisi, and the respect around the world that he garnered, and the world, you know, those people um, really respected him, his calm demeanor. Um, he really he improved the economy in Iran, and he was really pushing forward with the stuff you were talking about, but with Eurasia, Asia coming together, West Asia and the world, and um, he was involved in so much and so respected, but in the West, people have no idea.
Yes, people have no idea in the West. We just don't know. Of course, generally speaking, America does not pay attention to international relations. Maybe we pay attention to what's going on in a few nations, okay, in Europe, or if there's a war there might be considerable attention that's paid, okay, to Ukraine or something like that. But we're ignorant of the social movements even in Europe.
Yes, we are.
We're ignorant of the social movements, okay, in Latin America, in Colombia, for example, in Brazil, for
Hmm.
example, okay, in Mexico, okay, our neighbor. We don't pay attention, to developments there.
No, and any kind of information that people here in the West will hear, it's slanted to how the U.S. wants you to hear things,
It's not even how the U.S. wants you to hear things, it's how the U.S. elite that's running our government
wants you
wants
to hear it.
you to hear things. And of course, they want to give their simplistic narratives because though they don't think that we, the people, can handle true narratives about what is going on, okay, in other nations. And also, not only do they think we can handle it, they also think that we ought not to be exposed to it because we might get some dangerous ideas.
That's true.
We might get some dangerous ideas about what is going on in Mexico. We might get some dangerous ideas about what is going on, okay, in Central Asia. we may begin to get a different conception of foreign governments. We may not any longer believe that the governments of Russia and China, okay, are run by villains who, on a daily basis, exploit, okay, their populations, rather than being run by people who, whether they are authoritarian, okay, or not, are certainly building up their countries from an economic standpoint
Yes.
and integrating their countries with other countries from an economic standpoint, okay, and accomplishing things in terms of building infrastructure and building out their societies that we are not even imagining here in these
No.
days. We used to lead the world in major projects that were good for America, that were good for our people and brought prosperity to various aspects, okay, of our country. We cannot even build any longer major high-speed rail corridors, okay, in this country.
Mhm.
Every time we attempted to do that, there's no progress on it. Okay, we're just not really committed to doing big things anymore. That's because we have an elite that is dominated by private donors and by private interests, and that doesn't care about the public purpose,
No, they don't.
and that doesn't care about most of our voting population either, because they've basically flummoxed the voting population of the United States into having an extremely limited perspective about what could be done by politics.
Hmm. And that's the one thing I have to say with uh, the former the president Raisi, rest in peace, may he rest in peace. Um, Wouldn't have known much about him had I not been, um, say, reporting from Press TV. You know, Press TV really introduced me to him, and we really saw what a wonderful man he was.
Right, and there was no way to learn what his good qualities were, but from the American press. All we heard from the American press was that he was a religious fanatic, okay, and that he was an authoritarian, okay, and he was a supporter of the more violent elements, okay, in Iranian society. We heard nothing about his skill, okay, in governing. We heard nothing about his accomplishments, okay, in terms of Iran. We had no idea about the growing military strength, okay, of Iran. Uh, in terms of what has recently happened, uh, I'm sure the American public had no inkling that it would be possible for the Iranians to respond, okay, to the Israeli attack on their consulate, okay,
Mhm.
in the way that they did. I don't even know if the Americans, if most Americans are now aware of the kind of response that was delivered by the Iranians to the Israelis.
Right, and that was just, as I said, it was, not using the better equipment at all.
It wasn't, it was using very good equipment, but not their latest.
No, it wasn't their latest at all.
It wasn't their latest hypersonic, okay, equipment.
Right, and so they didn't spend a lot of money on it. It wasn't anything of, say, a huge amount of money. The amount of money, for example, that Israel had to use and the US government coming in, the US military, you know, protecting Israel. So they spent a fortune protecting Israel.
They spent a fortune, okay, protecting Israel. We spent a fortune, okay, protecting Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And the Iranians proved that the fortune we spent was in vain because they got through the combined air defenses
Mm-hmm.
of the United States and the UK, okay, and Israel, and delivered 9 ballistic missiles precisely targeted uh, to military centers, okay, in Israel, demonstrating to the Israelis that they could get through anywhere, okay, in Israel
Mm-hmm.
if the Israelis continue to attack their assets. It was a marvelous demonstration. It was telegraphed. There was advance warning, and, and the Iranians were saying to the Israelis, "We dare you to stop this."
Mm-hmm.
And the Israelis and the Americans and British could not stop the Iranians from hitting their targets with hypersonic ballistic missiles.
And the psychological effect as well, because it was what, a couple of weeks. So the Israeli people didn't know when it was going to happen, when a response was coming.
They didn't know when the response was coming, but there was advance warning by the Iranians when they decided to respond.
Yes, it was advance warning, and they had to wait, not knowing when.
Right, but knowing generally when, but not knowing specifically when the rockets, okay, were going to arrive.
Exactly, and that's what um, when you hear Israelis talking, it just terrified them. The panic of waiting and waiting and waiting, knowing it's coming, but still waiting and waiting.
So I was going to say, of course, around the country, as we all know, we're in the midst, okay, of an election year, an election period. We're going to have elections to Congress very, very soon now. In the Virginia 10th District, where I live, Jennifer Wexton, Congresswoman, okay, a decent person, but part of the Democratic centrist establishment, uh, has to leave because I think that uh, she's a victim of a paralytic disease. I believe it's Lou Gehrig's disease, but it's or something very similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's an autoimmune disease, and she has to retire from Congress after only 3 terms. Uh, so, of course, a whole bunch of people are about to compete in the primary for the nomination, okay, of the Democratic Party. So, what do they talk about? Well, uh, there are what look like 2 primary candidates because one of the candidates got the endorsement of the Washington Post, and another candidate got the endorsement, okay, of Jennifer Wexton, the congressperson who's going to retire. Uh, I want to look at Dan Helmer, okay, right now, uh, who's the guy, okay, who was endorsed by the Washington Post. So, what are his priorities? He wants to defend our democracy.
Are you going to put him up in the room, or are you just reading something?
I think I'm just going to read something.
Okay.
I don't think I'm going to put it up in the room.
Okay.
What does he mean by defending, okay, democracy? Or what he means, okay, is anti-MAGA stuff. He's talking about fighting back, support, okay, of HR1, blocking Trump. That's his idea. He doesn't have a thing to say. He didn't have a thing to say about the primary process, in the Democratic Party for president, didn't have a thing to say that the primary process has basically been shut down by the Democrats. People whose views were different from those of Joe Biden had no chance to compete. The primary was completely rigged. He has nothing to say. He wants to defend our democracy. He has nothing to say about how things are being rigged against the third parties, how the third party challengers are being opposed across the whole country by both Democrats and Republicans who try to prevent the third parties from, getting on the ballot. How does the things that Dan Helmer wants to do, how do they defend our democracy? I mean, our democracy is not just about being defended from Donald Trump, or being defended from the MAGA Republicans. It's also about the need to defend against the Biden administration that just a few days ago lifted the passport of Scott Ritter because they didn't like what he had to say and they didn't want him traveling to Russia to get some more material to say things that they didn't like. So they lifted his passport without any warning as he was about to get on the plane to go to Russia for a 45-day trip to do people-to-people diplomacy, over there. And the administration decided to take away his freedom of travel, one of his basic rights, and to impinge on his freedom of speech, and to also impinge on his freedom of the press, because, of course, he writes articles all the time, about this too. And so, a regime that is not defending democracy, but is undermining democracy in all sorts of ways. I mentioned the Scott Ritter incident. I could have mentioned the prosecution of Julian Assange for years and years and years. I mentioned, of course, the rigging of our democratic processes in the primaries. And, of course, the rigging of our democratic processes in the general election, trying to restrict it to only the Democrats, and the Republicans. That's part of the rigging. But he doesn't talk about defending our democracy in terms of doing anything about that, does he? Some defense of our democracy. So, of course, he wants to stand up for our reproductive rights. When his wife Karen had their second son, her cardiologist told her that another pregnancy could be fatal. Access to safe and legal abortion protects her, tens of thousands of other women across Virginia, as well as the tens of thousands more in neighboring states with abortion restrictions. So, as a delegate, of course, Dan stood up for reproductive rights. And when he gets into Congress, he wants to stand up, for reproductive rights. He wants to work to codify Roe v. Wade and abortion and reproductive rights across the country, helping the 1 in 8 parents with fertility issues. So fine, we know he's going to do that. He wants to fight to take the weapons of war off our streets. He wants to protect our environment. What does he mean by protecting our environment? Well, he did some things when he was a representative. He is a representative now in this state. He was strong on the environment, at the state level. He knows that the climate is the biggest threat to our country. He'll support policies that invest the resources required to save the planet. But he's very vague, about all this. He continued to push legislation like President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which is the mildest of acts. in order to do something about the climate. It's a pitiful beginning to do anything with respect to climate change, but he won't mention anything beyond that. Okay. He wants to grow our economy to support the middle class. And so he gives you a bunch of cliches about how he's going to do that. He's going to expand SNAP. He did this at the state level. He's going to do this at the federal level too. He's going to be supportive of labor, the ability to form and join, our labor unions. So he's kind of gently center left. He wants to make healthcare affordable, and attainable for all. But of course, he doesn't want to come out for Medicare for all because that might antagonize President Joe Biden and the Democratic establishment. She's going to continue to work to increase access to affordable health care, lower the cost of prescription medication, and ensure all Virginians and Americans around the country have the power to access the quality care they need and deserve. Too many people face crippling medical debt. That's why Dan will keep fighting to reduce hospital costs in first hospitals. He doesn't support or propose any legislation for canceling Medicare, canceling medical debt. He doesn't support any legislation or propose it for Medicare for all, so people don't run up any more medical debt in the future. He doesn't mention any of those things. And foreign policy, he wants to secure peace and democracy around the globe. So let's see what he means there. Oh, by the way, he was a Rhodes Scholar as well as serving in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Korea. So he was a Rhodes Scholar. He's a pretty bright guy, high IQ guy, right? He believes Congress must take an active role on national security, that we avoid wars of choice like those that killed his friends, in Iraq. He doesn't mention the war of choice with respect to Ukraine, where we provoked, a war of choice and are now supporting that particular war. It means domestically fighting for our democracy and economic opportunity, and overseas that we lead with our values, whatever that means, and stand with those who share them. Oh, such as the Ukrainian government shares our values. A one-party dictatorship with a secret police. That's our values. Those are the values we share. Going forward, America has a critical role in managing peacefully the rise of China, building a close partnership with the world's largest democracy in India, defeating Russian aggression through support to Ukraine. So there he's coming out for continued support for the war, in Ukraine. Why? We've lost that war already. The Ukrainian government is on the point of collapse, and it was a government not worth supporting anyway because it's a military dictatorship, and the government has been full of neo-Nazis. Oh, here, as the grandson and survivors who hid in the floorboards underneath the Dachau to survive the Nazis in modern-day Ukraine, the horror of the 10/7 terrorist attacks hit home for Dan. So, of course, he wants to support the Ukrainian effort, even though he knows at some level, I'm sure this guy is smart enough to know that the Ukrainian government was full of Nazis. The Ukrainian military in Ukraine was and is full of Nazis from the western part of Ukraine, the Banderists. He knows that, but he covers it up. Well, he supports a two-state solution that realizes the aspiration of two peoples who seek to live in peace side by side, in hopes that out of this horrible tragedy, that Israelis and Palestinians can forge such peace. He doesn't mention that the person we support, in Israel, comes out for continued U.S. support for Israel because the special relationship is special and critical to our own national security. He doesn't mention anything about Netanyahu, doesn't mention anything about the uh, ethnic cleansing, doesn't mention anything about the genocide that's occurring there right now. He doesn't say what he's going to do about that. He's just going to support Israel because the relationship we have with Israel is special and critical to our own national security. How is it improving our own national security when our ships cannot get through the Red Sea right now because we're being attacked by the Houthis, because the Houthis object to the genocide? How is it improving our national security when we're being isolated around the whole world diplomatically because the rest of the world opposes the genocide and we and our European vassals are the only countries that support the genocide? And their support is failing, by the way. They're beginning to recognize Palestine, as a state and beginning to be very uncomfortable with the genocide. But Dan Helmer is not uncomfortable with the genocide. So that's one choice that we have. He, of course, is a leading choice. We have a number of choices. He, of course, is a leading choice. But the other leading choice, he was endorsed by the Washington Post. That's what makes him a leading choice. The other leading choice is Suhas Subramaniam. Let's go to Suhas and see what he supports. So, okay, so he's endorsed, as I said, by Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton. Why did she endorse him? Well, he has come up through the ranks of the state party here. There's a strong Democratic state party here, which is sort of centrist. It was dominated by a former governor, Governor Warner, who of course is now Senator Warner, and Governor McCain, or Governor Tim Kaine, who is now Senator Tim Kaine. And they established a strong Democratic Party there. They're among the more conservative of Democratic senators, in Congress, and they support centrist conservatives here, in the state. Where does Suhas come from? Well, his mother came to the United States in 1979. She was a native, of India. And she came to marry his father and live her American dream and pursue a career, in medicine. He attended Tulane University, in the New Orleans. So he got involved, in healthcare. He served on Capitol Hill as a policy aide, where he worked to expand and improve healthcare access to millions of Americans, helped build the bipartisan coalition in support of the DREAM Act. He earned his law degree with honors at Northwestern University, He served as a White House technology policy advisor to President Obama. During his time in the Obama administration, he tackled some of the most challenging issues facing our nation, including cybersecurity threats and modernizing government agencies so that they were better equipped to serve the needs of the American people. After leaving the White House, he started his own small business in Loudoun County and served our community as a volunteer medic, an EMT, and a firefighter. He won a competitive four-way primary to the Virginia General Assembly in 2019. When politicians on both sides of the aisle refused to take on Big Pharma, Sugas passed legislation to bring down drug costs and increase price transparency for consumers. So he did some good things in the state legislature. So what are his priorities now that he wants to move on to the Congress? So let's see what the priorities are. Let's not focus on the past, where he has a pretty decent record, of course. Let us focus on the future. He, like Dan Helmer, wants to end gun violence in our country. He wants to protect our democracy. Mentions January 6th. Of course, he's very much opposed to Trump. He wants to get rid of ID laws that are restrictive, designed to suppress the vote. He wants to change our campaign finance laws. He wants to ensure middle-class families are not drowned out by big money. He doesn't mention how he can change our campaign finance laws in the face of the opposition of the Supreme Court. He mentions nothing about that. He wants to ensure the reproductive rights of women. So far, his platform is very similar, Suhas's is, to Dan Helmer's. And there's one difference in background that may be important. Dan Helmer, is Jewish. Suhas, is not. Dan Helmer, you heard him state his support for the special relationship, with Israel. We don't know how he feels about the genocide that's occurring, in Gaza. So, is there anything from Suhas about this here? Oh, yes. Suhas is very concerned about the climate crisis. But he doesn't say, as senator and delegate, he advanced a bold climate agenda, but he doesn't say what he would do in the Congress. Obviously, though, he is very concerned about an emergency. So he's very like Dan Helmer, in that respect. I don't see a hair's breadth difference between these two guys. He wants to limit the role of money in politics, but he doesn't say how. As a representative here, in Virginia, he's proud to point out his campaign does not take any corporate PAC money, but of course, he does take money. He does take money from a Democratic Party, since the Virginia Democratic Party supports him. And we know that the Democratic Party is taking the corporate PAC money. He proudly signed the Big Money Out of Virginia pledge to limit the influence of corporate money, in politics. But he's still indirectly taking the corporate money. Obviously, he's opposed to the role of big money in politics. Dan Helmer is too. But what are they going to do about it? They don't say.
Hmm.
And we need to know. Boosting healthcare access and affordability. Again, a plain vanilla Democrat. Every Virginian should have access to affordable and reliable health care, regardless of their race or background. As someone who worked on the Affordable Care Act and helped pass the law in Congress, so we have him to thank for the Affordable Health Care Act.
Oh, lovely.
Lovely. I support efforts to protect and expand the Affordable Care Act. I support making Medicare a healthcare option for everyone so it can reduce costs for working families while preserving access to private providers for those who prefer it. So he wants to make Medicare a healthcare option. That's different from Dan Helmer. Dan Helmer doesn't mention that. If you make Medicare, a healthcare option, you give people the option to buy into Medicare, people who are less than 65. That might or might not be cheaper than what they have now in terms of affordable health care. We need to know more about the details of that. He seems a shade closer to Medicare for All than Dan Helmer, but both talk about basically protecting and expanding the Affordable Care Act. So there's not a big difference between them on that. He mentions housing and mental health crises and things like that. He's definitely a generally progressive, slightly left of center person, but he's no Bernie Sanders in what he advocates for. Okay, so there it is. Uh, does he mention anything about foreign policy? I don't see anything about foreign policy here. Maybe I missed it under protecting our democracy. I don't know. No, no. He doesn't say anything about our foreign policy. He wants to go to Congress. He doesn't have a foreign policy priority. What does that mean? It means he's not telling us
Hmm.
what he wants to do about the wars in Ukraine and Israel. He doesn't tell us what he wants to do about the coming war with China. What is he telling us by his silence? He is telling us that he's going to go along with Joe Biden, or if Joe Biden is not reelected to the presidency, that he's probably going to work against. If it's a Republican, he's probably going to work against a Republican. What he'll do in case the president who's elected is Jill Stein or Bobby Kennedy, we have no way of knowing. He's not talking when it comes to foreign policy. He thinks it's best to be silent about it. At least we know that Dan Helmer is probably going to be more of the same when it comes to foreign policy. But in Suhas's case, we don't even know that. All we know is that he's a clean-cut Indian guy with a nice-looking family who has done a good job as a state legislator, but who's afraid of talking about foreign policy while he runs for office. Now, I could go over quite a number of other people. I'm going to be going over them anyway to decide about who I want to vote for in this particular primary, because I will vote in this particular primary. I'm not going to vote for a Democrat in the fall. There's no way I'm going to do that under present circumstances. But I'm going to vote, in the primary and see if I can help somebody to win who might change the horrible situation we find ourselves in. One thing is clear, either Suhas Subramaniam or Dan Helmer is going to do anything to help us get out of this fix. That's pretty clear. And they're the two leading candidates now based on their endorsement. I do want to say one more thing about healthcare, in this country. I've had Kaiser Healthcare for some time. Generally, I've liked the Kaiser Healthcare on previous occasions when we had some serious incidents occur. At one point, it was more than 10 years ago now, I had a subdural hematoma, freak accident. As I was getting out of the car, I hit my head on top of the car. I got myself, hematoma. So I went in for $60,000 worth of surgery. It went well. Kaiser got a consultant from Georgetown to do the surgery. He was very skilled. He did a wonderful job. I recovered with no damage to my brain. My head is supposedly stronger than it was before, maybe because of the scar tissue over it. Guess what? I had $100 copay.
Wow.
Because at that time, Kaiser was under the classic Medicare program, and I had bought into to a supplemental policy from Kaiser. So basically, it was Medicare that was taking care of the hospital costs, and under old classical Medicare, Kaiser itself could not bill for the room. They could not bill, for the room. Later on, Bonnie went in, actually soon after. She went in for breast surgery. That was pretty expensive too. It wasn't as expensive as my head surgery, but it was pretty expensive. And she was in the hospital for a few days. I forget. I think it was about 4 days, if I recall correctly. Something like that. And we got another copay, still under that same policy, the classical Medicare policy. We got another copay of $100. But she was in the hospital for 4 days, at that time. Occupying a similar room, in another hospital to the kind of room that she occupied for her recent surgery, which I'm going to talk about. Then, following that, in about 2013, she had to have a procedure done. There was a non-cancerous tumor that was growing, inside of her ear. And it had taken away her hearing, in her ear. But the tumor, even though it was non-cancerous, it still was growing. It represented a danger. So she underwent a procedure called a gamma knife procedure at one of the best hospitals in the area, the hospital where all the congressmen go. So through Kaiser, she got to go to that hospital for this procedure. Now, she didn't stay in the hospital. She was an outpatient. This procedure took I guess about an hour, okay, in the morning. And she was fine after the procedure. In fact, after she had some lunch with me, uh, well, I should tell the story. The hospital gave her a lunch when she got up, okay, from the procedure, but that was entirely unsatisfactory. So we went to the hospital cafeteria for some sushi. And so we ate some sushi there, and then she was ready to go home. And she drove back home for
Mm,
the procedure on the same day. What was
wow.
the bill for that procedure? The bill was $80,000.
Holy shit.
What was our copay for that procedure? Our copay was the good old $100. Now, this is a long story, but I am coming to the point, which I will come to in the next few seconds. About 3 years ago, Kaiser decided that it was going to discontinue the supplemental insurance program that we were on and give us the choice of leaving Kaiser coverage or enrolling in their new Medicare Advantage program, rah, rah, rah. So, since all our doctors were at Kaiser and we've gotten very satisfactory health care from them for many years, and very inexpensive health care, okay, as well, uh, we decided we would stay with Kaiser for the Medicare Advantage program. In some ways, it's been good because uh, we no longer have to pay the premium. In other words, to get the coverage, no premium, okay, is required. We do pay each of us an extra $40 a month for limited coverage in the dental, vision, okay, and hearing areas, which we've taken advantage of. And that's also saved us money since we participated in it. It hasn't been completely satisfactory. The dental stuff is still too damned expensive. The copay is too damned expensive. Uh, the vision coverage uh, is pretty good. It basically covers glasses and small copays. Okay, see the eye doctors. Okay, and the copay cost for cataract surgery, which we both have had, is very, very low. It's again still the same old $100, and we both have gotten cataract surgery for that. So that's been very good. Uh, but very recently, Bonnie broke her hip. Well, I shouldn't say she broke her hip. She fell, and her hip had broke. I don't mean to imply that it was her fault that she deliberately broke her hip, okay, or anything. But anyway, she had a clean break, and so uh, she had to go into the hospital. This time, she had to stay in the hospital. She was let into the hospital, and she had to stay for 5 days. The bill for this was $57,000. So here comes the punchline. This time, because there was an ambulance involved, we received an ambulance charge of $553. We don't know how much of that Kaiser is going to cover yet, okay, exactly, because the ambulance company has just sent the bill to Kaiser, but we believe that we're still going to be left with a $238 bill from the ambulance because the copay doesn't cover the whole thing, in spite of the fact that Kaiser told us to go get the ambulance and get her to the hospital, okay, as soon as possible. But they still got to uh, charge a copay or stick us with a copay, okay, for the ambulance. The hospital copay was $1,125.
Holy crap.
Uh, that's a large copay for us because we're basically living on Social Security,
Right.
okay, and a little bit of help from our friends. So that's a balanced bill. It doesn't fit our budget, and it represents a hardship for us. Now, why do we have the copay of $1,125 when for equally serious surgeries in the past, we always had a copay of $100? The reason why, we traced this down. We went back to Kaiser and talked to member services the other day. And we have a very helpful and charming representative, okay, of member services that Bonnie and I had a wonderful and humorous time talking to. And we couldn't tell from the bill we received from the hospital and the explanation of benefits from Kaiser, which was very detailed, where that copay was actually coming from. We traced it down, and I have to emphasize there must have been about, I don't know, 50 items that were itemized in the explanation, okay, of benefits. But the explanation of benefits was still not transparent because they played a trick on us. For each of the items, okay, they would put a charge on each of the items, like $1,150 or $8,645 or $13,000 and some odd dollars. But then they would have zero under the category of plan approved. In other words, what the Medicare Advantage plan, okay, actually approved. Then they had another column for Kaiser paid and another column for your share. And invariably, on all of these items except one, all of the 50 items except one, and maybe there weren't exactly 50 items, I'm not being completely accurate here. There were a whole bunch of items, but they were always billed like this: the cost for the item, okay, the amount the plan approved, the amount that Kaiser paid, which was never exactly what the plan approved, and your share. And in every case except one line item, one row of that bill, okay, there was zero for what Kaiser paid and zero for our share. There was one bill, there was one item, however. It was the bill for the room for the 5 days. And the bill for the room was $8,645. And the plan approved for that something like 16,000, and I think it was $16,583. I don't think that's okay exactly. I'm quoting this, from memory. Okay, but it was approximately that. Kaiser paid 14,700, okay, and $84. And we were left with a copay, okay, of $1,125. So what Kaiser had done is they lumped all the charges for all the items into that one item. But the charge for that item, the provider was charging for that item the actual cost of the room that they were billing for, and that was $8,645. But Kaiser bundled in what the plan approved, that's $16,583 against that item, not showing us what the plan had approved for all the items. Okay, not showing us what Kaiser actually paid for all of the items, but lumping it all into that item. So Kaiser paid, from what we could see, $14,784. They paid that against the $8,645 room charge. I mean, it made no sense. We couldn't decipher it. And that was the item against which we had the $1,125 charge. Okay, so our representative, having a lot of experience in those things, seeing other people come in who had this kind of treatment, said, "Oh, that's the copay for the room. That's the copay for the room." So we're trying to sit there and find out what the copay charge was for the room each day. So we divided the copay for the room of $1,125 by the 5 days. And we got a copay of $225 a night, okay, for the room. Okay, now, of course, the charge for the room was much greater than that, because the $8,645, thank you, honey. The $8,645, I'm doing it on my calculator now because I can't remember it. Oh, I made a mistake here. So 8645 divided by 5. Yeah, that's what I thought it was. It was $1,729 a day for the room. That's what the hospital was billing. Kaiser paid everything for the room except for $225 per day. So where did Kaiser get the permission to leave a $225 copay for that room? Where did they get that permission? It must have been put into the Medicare Advantage legislation that they could separately bill for the room, which they were never able to do under classical Medicare. They were never able to bill for the room. In other words, there might have been bills for the room that went to Medicare from the hospital, but Medicare never had the option to not pay the whole thing for the room. If it was a serious hospital incident with thousands and thousands of dollars of charges, all Medicare could do was to cover the whole thing as a lump and pay everything except the copay, which was only $100 under classical Medicare. But under Medicare Advantage, the insurer, which in this case was Kaiser rather than classical Medicare, got the freedom to leave a copay for the room of $225 a day. Somebody got to write that into the bill and said, well, that's not much for people to pay. Only $225 a day. I mean, almost everyone can afford that, can't they?
No.
Obviously, that was the reasoning here. And that was a difference from classical Medicare. Under classical Medicare, we would have gotten a $100 copay. Under Medicare Advantage, we got an $1,125 copay. And that's what happens when you privatize Medicare, which is what Medicare Advantage actually does The way Medicare Advantage works is the Medicare program gives Kaiser a fixed amount to handle every person depending upon the categorization of their patients, which is based on whether they have illnesses of a certain kind or chronic illnesses or have illnesses in the past or stuff like that. And so Kaiser gets a lump sum to handle every patient. So the insurance is really with Kaiser. It's no longer with Medicare. And so Kaiser, there are rules that Medicare sets down for Kaiser to follow. And it was no longer true that Kaiser had to pay the whole hospital bill except for $100 copay. It got to put in a different copay of $225 a day for the hospital room. So Kaiser could make more money and put an extra burden on the patient. So that's a long story, and some of you may not consider it to be that significant because what's $1,125 anyway? But for an 85-year-old couple who are living mainly on Social Security, that's a significant sort of copay. Now, of course, we're going to go to the hospital and we're going to apply for them to forgive the copay because we have, relatively relatively low income, these days. And I'm told the hospital will be sympathetic and they will forgive some or all, the copay. But we're at their mercy at this point, whereas under the old classical Medicare program, we would have had a $100 copay instead of $1,125 copay. And you know what? Under the new Medicare for All program that Bernie Sanders was trying to pass, we would have had no copay at all. And by the way, our dental coverage would have been completely coverage. It would have been free at the point of service. We just had to pay something like $900 for dental coverage, for Bonnie. And that's after we paid the premium for dental coverage. We wouldn't have had to pay that, in the Medicare for All system. We wouldn't have had to pay anything for glasses in the Medicare for All system. As it turned out, we were covered for glasses, but there was a $425 limit per person, when we get, new glasses. So we were limited to that. And Bonnie got some hearing aids, which, retailed for an expensive cost, like it was $1,500 per year, $3,000. P.S. The hearing aids don't really work for her. And she'd like to get some other hearing aids, but she can't get any new hearing aids for 3 years now. And we don't know if any other hearing aids would be available under the Kaiser program because they're taking care of this, through business associations with other companies. So you can't go to, to any hearing aid vendor, which under the Medicare for All program, you would be able to do. So if one set of hearing aids don't work, you could get another set of hearing aids that maybe do work better for you. In other words, this whole thing, our healthcare system, is a pain in the butt. It reduces the freedom of Americans. It reduces our financial freedom. It eats our time. It creates an incentive not to go to doctors. It makes us less healthy because of that. We all know it's a terrible system. Why do we have to live with it? Why do we have to have it? Because of the power of the donors over our congresspeople. And once again, this is a matter of dumping the corruption. We have to dump the corruption. We have to clean out the Congress of people who are bought by the healthcare interests. So this has been a big marathon for me. I've been on now for 2 hours and 45 minutes. I've much enjoyed myself. Thank you all for coming. I'll be back seeing you again, certainly on Tuesday, if not before. Oh, Dolores is still here, even if she's not on screen with me. She is still here. Thank you, Dolores. So, April says, yep, I avoid healthcare, going to doctors and all that. Sure. We avoided it for a time too. When there was a time when I was working as a consultant and the healthcare costs, the costs for insurance were going sky high. So we took a chance for a year and a half until we turned 65, and we didn't have any health insurance at all. And we couldn't go to doctors during that time. And we did have some healthcare incidents that time. But we could not go to doctors because we didn't have the insurance. The cost of it had gone up to something like $800 a month. And since, the consulting business is up and down and up and down and up and down, and during that period, it was mostly down. So we couldn't afford the $800 a month to pay for healthcare. So we didn't. So we took a chance. We lucked out, until we could get into Medicare. But it was luck. This is a terrible system. We need to pass the latest version of Medicare for All, legislation. We can't pass it because the Congress is bought. We can't do anything about the genocide because the Congress is bought. We can't do anything about the horrible Ukraine situation, which is exposing us to nuclear war, because the Congress is bought. We can't get anything done in Congress that's good for us, like, for example, expanding Social Security to what people need to live decently. We can't get a federal job guarantee. We can't do very much about the climate crisis, all because the Congress is bought. So, of course, I have my rule for voting in the election that is coming up. It's not a positive rule. It's a negative rule. It leaves it to you to vote for the person or the people that you like. It only tells you who to vote against. And the rule is vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corps, from individuals, from PACs or party committees, and who repudiate all super PAC support. That's the rule. Follow it. If we all follow it, I guarantee that we won't have any bought people in the House of Representatives starting at the beginning of January in 2025. If we all follow it, I guarantee we will have 1/3 of the Senate that is not bought, by anybody. And that 1/3 will probably be able to swing critical votes inside of the Senate to the side of the people even at the end of that first election. And if we follow this rule in the second election, then 2/3 of the senators are going to represent the people instead of the donors. And if we follow it for 3 elections, the whole Senate and the whole House will be free, okay, of the donors. And this is without any legislation. Then if you want to pass legislation to ban big money from politics, you'll be able to do it. You'll probably be able to do it even after the first year. But if you follow the rule for 3 elections, you'll certainly be able to do it after the 3rd election. You can pass all the constitutional amendments you want. You'll be able to pass all the bills you want, excluding the Supreme Court from reviewing campaign finance laws. And you will be able to get big money out of politics and protect us from big money. This is a solution people can implement. And we need to do that. We need to do that. So thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. You're a little bit down from the peak that this stream hit, but there's still 23 of you here. So that's very, very good for this program. And let's see. So April has been very active since she got here. Hope you had a nice dinner, April. April says, I got fenugreek extract 75% off from Vitamin Shop for my reoccurring appendicitis. Tastes like hell, but works heavenly. That's very good. We use supplements a lot too. April says, I have to rewatch when you talked about Kaiser. Had to step away a bit. It'll give me something to do tomorrow. Thank you, April. April says, Joe, it's so nauseating how the public cheers when candidates raise millions for campaigns. They don't get that they're slugs cheering for salt. I know. It's awful, April. Awful. So it's almost 12 midnight. Okay. Okay, Bonnie is pointing to the phone, which means I probably have to make a phone call now.
You have to look at this.
Okay. I have to look at it, and I will look at it. I'm going to end the stream right now. Thank you for coming.